The rain began pouring just as the coffin was lowered into the ground. Umbrellas opened across the cemetery as reporters pushed closer, cameras flashing non-stop. Black cars lined the gravel road, and some of the most powerful people in the country stood silently around the grave. Inside the polished mahogany coffin lay the body of billionaire Adrian Blackwood. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Near the back of the crowd, a tall man in a long black coat stood quietly beneath a wide umbrella. His beard was thick, his glasses slightly tinted, his hair darker than usual. No one paid him any attention, but his eyes never left the coffin, because the man standing there was Adrian Blackwood. He watched silently as the priest cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today to honor the life of Adrian Blackwood, a visionary businessman, a brilliant innovator, and a man whose influence shaped industries around the world." A few people bowed their heads. Adrian scanned the crowd slowly. Politicians, executives, investors, and the people closest to him. His wife, Clara, stood beside the coffin wearing a black veil. Her shoulders trembled slightly as she held a handkerchief to her face. Next to her stood his younger brother, Ethan, arms folded tightly, staring at the ground. A few feet away stood Marcus Hale, Adrian's longtime business partner. Marcus looked calm, too calm. Adrian's jaw tightened beneath the fake beard. "Interesting," he murmured quietly to himself, because only Adrian knew the truth. 3 days earlier, the world had watched breaking news flash across every screen. Adrian Blackwood's private jet had crashed in the mountains during a storm. There were no survivors. Authorities said the wreckage had burned so badly that identification was almost impossible. The country mourned the death of a billionaire genius, but Adrian Blackwood was not dead. He had staged the crash himself, and the funeral happening right now was the most important meeting of his life. A sudden voice behind him broke his thoughts. "Terrible tragedy, isn't it?" Adrian turned slightly. An elderly man stood beside him, shaking his head. "Such a brilliant man, gone just like that." Adrian nodded slowly. "Yes, tragic." But inside his chest, anger burned. Because the crash hadn't been random, someone had tried to kill him. 2 days before the supposed accident, Adrian had been reviewing flight logs in his office when something strange appeared on his screen: unauthorized system access to his private jet. At first, he assumed it was a maintenance check, but when he called the aviation team, they were confused. "No one touched the system, sir," the technician had said nervously. Adrian's instinct screamed that something was wrong, so he began digging deeper. Within hours, he discovered something terrifying. The navigation system had been tampered with. The flight route had been altered slightly, just enough to send the jet straight into the mountains during bad weather. Someone had planned his death. And the most disturbing part? Only a handful of people had access to those flight systems, people inside his inner circle. Adrian sat in silence in his office that night, staring at the city skyline. "Who would do this?" he whispered. His head of security, Daniel Ross, stood across the desk. "We don't know yet," Daniel said carefully, "but if someone inside your company is behind this, you can't confront them directly." Adrian looked up slowly. "Why not?" "Because they'll try again." Silence filled the room. Then Adrian said something unexpected. "What if they think they already succeeded?" Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Adrian leaned back in his chair. "What if I disappear?" Daniel stared at him. "You're suggesting we fake your death?" Adrian's jaw tightened beneath the fake beard. "Yes." At first, Daniel thought it was insane, but the more they talked, the more it made sense. If Adrian appeared dead, the people behind the plot would relax, they would talk, they would make mistakes, and Adrian would be watching. Now, standing in the cemetery watching his own funeral, Adrian felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but another part felt something deeper. Pain, because the people standing around his grave were people he trusted, and one of them had tried to murder him. The priest finished speaking. May his soul rest in peace. The coffin began lowering slowly into the ground. Clara suddenly let out a quiet sob. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. Marcus simply stared silently. Adrian studied every reaction carefully, every gesture, every glance. He needed to know who was lying. As the crowd began walking away, small conversations filled the air. Adrian moved closer, pretending to check his watch. Marcus lowered his voice. "Yes," he said into the phone. "It's done." Adrian froze. Marcus continued. "The funeral just ended." A long pause followed. Then Marcus said something that made Adrian's blood run cold. No, he never suspected anything. Adrian's heart began pounding. Marcus ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Adrian stepped back quickly before he could be noticed. His mind raced. Had Marcus been talking about him or something else? Before Adrian could process it, another voice spoke nearby. Clara. She was talking quietly to Ethan. "I still can't believe he's gone," she said softly. Ethan sighed. "Neither can I." Clara looked toward the grave. "Everything feels different now." Ethan glanced around before lowering his voice. "Well, some things will definitely change." Adrian's eyes narrowed again. The conversations around him felt different now, less like mourning, more like strategy. Power was shifting, and everyone knew it. Adrian turned away from the crowd and walked slowly toward the parking area. Daniel Ross stood waiting beside a black SUV. "Well?" Daniel asked quietly. Adrian removed his glasses. "I think the game has already started." Daniel opened the door. "You heard something?" Adrian paused. "Yes." "What?" Adrian looked back toward the cemetery, where the last guests were leaving. "Someone said I never suspected anything." Daniel frowned. "That could mean anything." Adrian nodded slowly. "That's exactly what worries me. Because one thing was now clear. Whoever tried to kill him believed the plan had worked. And if Adrian was right, the real mastermind was probably celebrating right this moment. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the like button, because what Adrian discovers next will make this mystery even more dangerous. Adrian stepped into the SUV. "Follow Marcus," he told Daniel. The engine started, and the billionaire who had just attended his own funeral began hunting the people who tried to kill him. But he had no idea yet that the real betrayal was far closer than he imagined. Adrian watched through the tinted window as Marcus Hale's black sedan pulled out of the cemetery parking lot. "Don't lose him," Adrian said quietly. Daniel Ross nodded from the driver's seat and eased the SUV into traffic. The rain continued falling, blurring the city lights as cars moved slowly down the highway. Inside the vehicle, Adrian removed the fake beard and rubbed his face. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Daniel asked, "Do you really think Marcus is involved?" Adrian stared ahead. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but that phone call didn't sound like grief." Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "What exactly did he say again?" Adrian repeated the words slowly. "It's done. The funeral just ended. He never suspected anything." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That definitely sounds like someone confirming a plan." "Yes," Adrian replied quietly. They drove in silence for another minute before Daniel spoke again. "You realize something, right?" Adrian glanced at him. "What?" "If Marcus is part of this, he's not working alone." Adrian nodded. "I know." because there was another question that bothered him even more. Who had access to his jet's navigation system? Very few people. Himself, his aviation team, Marcus, and 2 members of the company board. The list was small, but the betrayal would be enormous. Marcus's car turned suddenly into the underground garage of a luxury hotel. Daniel slowed the SUV. Looks like he's stopping here. Adrian leaned forward. Park across the street. Daniel pulled the SUV into a dim side street and shut off the engine. Marcus stepped out of his car and walked quickly into the hotel. Adrian watched carefully. "This isn't random," he said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You think he's meeting someone?" Adrian nodded. "Let's find out." Minutes later, they entered the hotel lobby separately. Adrian adjusted his coat and kept his head down as he walked past the front desk. The lobby buzzed with quiet conversations and the soft clinking of glasses from the bar. Then Adrian spotted Marcus. He was sitting in a corner lounge booth, but he wasn't alone. Across from him sat Victoria Crane. Adrian's stomach tightened. Victoria was one of the most powerful members of the company board, and one of the few people who had openly challenged Adrian in the past. Daniel quietly joined Adrian near a pillar. "That's not a good sign," Daniel whispered. Adrian shook his head. "No, it isn't." They moved closer, pretending to study a nearby painting while listening carefully. Victoria leaned forward across the table. "You handled the funeral well," she said calmly. Marcus sighed. "I still can't believe it actually worked." Adrian's pulse quickened. Victoria continued. "Relax. Everything is moving exactly as planned." Marcus lowered his voice. "What about the board vote next week?" Victoria smiled slightly. "With Adrian gone, the company needs leadership, and once we secure enough votes," Marcus finished the sentence, "I become CEO." Adrian felt a wave of anger rising in his chest, but Victoria's next words were even worse. "And once you're in control," she said quietly, "the restructuring begins." Marcus hesitated. "You mean selling the tech division?" "Yes. That was Adrian's biggest project." Victoria shrugged. "Adrian is dead." Those words hung in the air like poison. Marcus looked uneasy. "You're sure no one will question the crash?" Victoria leaned back confidently. "The investigation already confirmed it was an accident." Adrian's fists clenched. Daniel leaned closer and whispered, "This is bigger than we thought." Adrian nodded slowly. But something still didn't add up. Victoria had influence. Marcus had ambition, but neither of them had access to his jet systems alone. Someone else had helped them, and that meant the conspiracy was even deeper. Back at the table, Marcus spoke again. "What about Clara?" Adrian froze. Victoria waved dismissively. "She'll inherit plenty of money. She won't cause trouble." Marcus frowned. "You're certain?" Victoria smiled coldly. She never asked questions before. Why would she start now? Adrian felt a strange chill run down his spine. They stood there silently as Marcus finished his drink and stood up. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said. Victoria nodded. "Remember, stay calm. Everything is under control." Marcus walked toward the elevators. Victoria remained seated, checking her phone. Daniel whispered, "Should we follow Marcus again?" Adrian shook his head slowly. "No." Daniel looked surprised. "Why not?" Adrian's eyes remained locked on Victoria, "because she's the one pulling the strings." Victoria stood up moments later and walked toward the exit. Adrian waited a second before following. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Victoria stepped into a waiting car. Adrian quickly memorized the license plate as it drove away. Daniel joined him on the sidewalk. "Well?" Adrian exhaled slowly. "We just confirmed something important." "What?" "Marcus didn't plan this alone." Daniel crossed his arms. "And Victoria?" "She's involved." Daniel thought for a moment.
But you still don't know who sabotaged the jet. Adrian nodded. That's the missing piece. They returned to the SUV. As Daniel started the engine, Adrian leaned back in his seat, replaying the conversation in his mind. Marcus wanted power. Victoria wanted control of the company, but neither of them seemed nervous enough. If they actually ordered the crash themselves, would they really be this calm? Something still felt wrong. Then Adrian remembered something Marcus had said. What about Clara? Adrian's chest tightened. Why would Marcus worry about Clara? Daniel noticed his expression. What is it? Adrian spoke slowly. Marcus asked Victoria about Clara. So why would Clara matter to them? Daniel thought about it. Maybe because she inherits your shares. Adrian nodded. Yes, but Marcus didn't sound worried about money. He sounded worried about her. Adrian suddenly sat forward. Daniel, take me home. Daniel blinked. To the mansion? Yes. Why? Adrian's voice grew quieter. If I'm right. Daniel turned the wheel sharply as the SUV pulled into traffic. If you're right about what? Adrian stared out the window at the passing city lights. If I'm right, the most dangerous person in this entire situation isn't Marcus. Daniel glanced at him. Then who? Adrian's answer came slowly. My wife. The SUV sped through the night towards the Blackwood mansion, but Adrian had no idea that what he was about to discover inside his own home would hurt more than any betrayal from a business partner, and it would force him to confront a truth he never wanted to believe, because sometimes the people who smile beside us are the ones secretly digging our grave, and Adrian Blackwood was about to find out just how deep that betrayal really went.
The gates of the Blackwood mansion slowly opened as Daniel drove the SUV inside. The estate was dark and silent. Only a few lights glowed inside the massive house. Adrian stared at the familiar building with a strange feeling in his chest. This place feels different, Daniel said quietly. Adrian nodded. That's what happens when the owner is supposed to be dead. Daniel parked near the entrance. You want me to come inside? Adrian shook his head. No. If Clara is involved, she might recognize you. Daniel frowned. And if she isn't? Adrian opened the door. Then tonight will be very awkward. Rain dripped from the trees as Adrian walked toward the house. Every step felt heavier than the last. He quietly unlocked the side door using his key. Inside, the mansion was dimly lit. Adrian moved slowly through the hallway. Then he heard voices coming from the living room. He stopped instantly. Clara and someone else. Adrian stepped closer, his heart pounding. Clara's voice was calm, much calmer than someone who had just buried her husband. I told you the funeral would go smoothly, she said. A man's voice answered. I was worried someone might question the crash. Adrian's chest tightened. That voice was Marcus. Adrian moved closer to the doorway and looked inside. Clara sat on the couch, her black dress still on, her heels kicked off casually. Marcus stood near the fireplace holding a glass of whiskey. They looked relaxed, comfortable, like two people celebrating. Clara sighed. It's strange, though. Marcus looked at her. What is? Standing there today, she said slowly, watching him bury him. Marcus took a sip of whiskey. You don't feel guilty, do you? Clara laughed softly. Adrian stopped being my husband years ago. Adrian felt the words like a knife in his chest. Marcus walked closer to her. He trusted you completely. Clara shrugged. That's what made it easy. Adrian's hands trembled slightly. Marcus lowered his voice. You're sure the jet systems can't be traced back to us? Clara leaned forward calmly. I was the one who gave you access to the flight codes, remember? Marcus nodded. Right. Clara continued. Adrian always trusted me with his travel plans. I simply shared the information. Adrian's stomach dropped. His wife, the person he trusted most, she had helped plan his death. Marcus sat beside her. Once the board approves my position as CEO next week, everything will fall into place. Clara smiled. And I inherit Adrian's shares. Marcus raised his glass. To new beginnings. Clara clinked her glass against his. Adrian stepped into the room. Funny, he said calmly. I was about to say the same thing. The glasses froze midair. Marcus turned first. The color drained from his face. Clara slowly looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Adrian stood in the doorway, rainwater dripping from his coat. Marcus whispered, barely able to breathe. That's impossible. Clara's eyes widened. You're dead. Adrian walked further into the room. Clearly not. Marcus stumbled backward. How are you here? Adrian's voice was cold, because the crash never happened. Clara stood up slowly. Her face shifted from shock to something else. Fear. You staged it? Adrian nodded. I discovered someone tampered with my jet systems. He looked directly at her. I just didn't expect that person to be my wife. Clara tried to recover. You're misunderstanding. Adrian raised a hand. Please don't lie again. Silence filled the room. Marcus suddenly moved toward the door. I'm leaving. Daniel's voice came from behind him. I wouldn't recommend that. Marcus froze. Daniel stepped into the house, blocking the exit. Adrian looked back at Clara. For 18 years I built an empire, but apparently the biggest threat was sitting at my own dinner table. Clara crossed her arms. You neglected this marriage long before tonight. Adrian shook his head slowly. So the solution was murder. She didn't answer. Marcus spoke nervously. Adrian, listen, we can talk about this. Adrian laughed softly. Oh, we will. Sirens suddenly echoed outside the mansion. Marcus turned pale. You called the police? Adrian nodded. About 20 minutes ago. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Clara stared at him. You planned this. Adrian looked around the room. I attended my own funeral today. He stepped closer. I wanted to see who would celebrate. Police officers entered the house moments later. Marcus tried to speak, but the officers quickly handcuffed him. Clara stood frozen as another officer approached. Adrian watched silently. The woman he once loved was being arrested for trying to kill him. As the police led them both toward the door, Clara turned back. You think this changes anything? She said bitterly. Adrian didn't respond. Marcus looked desperate. You'll regret this. Adrian finally spoke. No. His voice was calm. I regret trusting you. The police cars drove away minutes later. The mansion fell silent again. Daniel walked back inside. Well, he said, that was dramatic. Adrian sat down slowly on the couch. The strange part? Daniel waited. I still feel empty. Daniel nodded. Betrayal usually does that. Adrian looked toward the window where the rain had finally stopped. Earlier that day, he had stood beside his own grave, watching people mourn a man who wasn't actually dead. But the truth was, something inside him had died. Trust, illusion, and the life he thought he had. Daniel broke the silence. So now what? Adrian thought for a moment. Then he stood up. Tomorrow morning, the world will learn Adrian Blackwood is alive. Daniel smiled slightly. That's going to break the internet. Adrian walked toward the window and looked out at the dark estate. And the company? Daniel asked. Adrian's voice grew steady again. I rebuild it. He turned back toward the room, without traitors. Then he looked directly ahead. And if you made it this far in the story, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment below. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Are you talking to an imaginary audience now? Adrian smiled faintly. After attending my own funeral, he paused. Nothing feels impossible anymore. And somewhere in the distance, the first light of morning began to rise.